Okay, it's noon, so I'm going to start the webinar. I am Katie Lund, CIRCA's Director of Engagement. Thanks for joining today's Resilient Connecticut webinar. It's an exciting time for the Resilient Connecticut project because we're at a point where we're shifting from phase 2 of our work, where we've been doing a vulnerability assessment in New Haven and Fairfield counties, to this phase 3, where we're identifying specific projects to do some design and implementation strategies. And we're going to start the webinar by giving a brief introduction about those different phases before we go into the new 7 projects that have been identified. So in addition to John Tracinsky and David Murphy, who are here as CIRCA staff joining me today, we are also very fortunate to have 2 municipal staff to speak about their projects. We have from Norwalk Planning and Zoning, we have Michelle Andrzejewski, and from Fairfield's Planning and Zoning Department, we have Emmeline Harrigan. So we really appreciate your participation today. Before I turn it over to John, just a few housekeeping things to mention. We are recording the webinar and we will send a link to everyone following today's event. And you're all muted and you've entered in mute mode, but you can enter a chat. I entered a chat as an example for your questions throughout the hour. We'll definitely be leaving time at the end, but if you have a question about a specific project, we could also pause as we're going through the slides too. So let me know. I'll be moderating those, and we'll keep to the hour. So we will end this at 1 o'clock. All right, so John, I'll turn it over to you, and the other speakers will turn their video on as we get to their slides. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Tracinsky, and I'm the Director of Resilience Planning at CIRCA, and the Project Director for Resilient Connecticut. So we're going to run through some of the details and issues of each of the projects that we're moving forward in phase 3. First, a quick reminder of some of the origins of this work, as Katie alluded to. So Resilient Connecticut was a project that focused on Fairfield and New Haven counties. And the initial phases of the project, in phase 1, there was a framework that was developed. That framework included some guiding principles and priorities that we moved into phase 2. And phase 2 was really sort of a broad look across a wide area of Fairfield and New Haven counties. And we partnered with the 4 COGs that have jurisdictions in the 2 counties. And it really had an emphasis on the transportation corridors along the Metro North lines, not only along the shoreline, but also the lines along the Naugatuck River and I-91 corridors up to Meriden and up to Waterbury and Danbury. And, we were really looking for where there are flooding and extreme heat vulnerabilities, and in particular where those impact the potential to for the state to implement more transit-oriented development. And so we really kind of prioritized the vulnerabilities and some of the issues to affordable housing and critical infrastructure around those TOD opportunities. So these 7 projects really sort of were founded in that vulnerability assessment during phase 2. And we mapped out a series of the different issues across the 2 counties. We called those resilience opportunities. And we identified there were 63 of them that we initially identified. And so these 7 are a first round of projects that were, partnering with the local municipality to try to develop some strategies and turn those strategies into projects. So some of the phase 2 work, if you're interested in exploring that more, if you haven't already. So there were 2 major pieces or 2 major deliverables for phase 2. The first was a vulnerability assessment report. So how do we get from that vulnerability assessment report to what we call these resilience opportunities. And my colleague David Murphy and his team really led that work. And there was a number of different pieces of analysis that went into it. So all of that is here at this link, including a number of stakeholder workshops that we did. We did 2 workshops in each COG in phase 2. And so, I encourage you to look into those if you're interested. And then we have a final report, which sort of sums up the whole phase 2 process of Resilient Connecticut and includes a map portfolio of 20 of those 63. So we, as time and funding allow, we're hoping to sort of build out that portfolio of the maps that came out of this effort. And as projects are developed, we're really hoping to set up these resilience opportunity areas with that idea of the project pipeline in mind, and really helping the municipalities to put together competitive proposals for funding from state and federal sources. So what are we doing in phase 3? So there are 7 of these areas that we're going to move forward with in phase 3 of Resilient Connecticut. That work has already started with some of the initial existing and future conditions analysis that the CIRCA team is doing. And then we're going to be partnering with some consultant teams to develop some of the concepts and the designs. That'll run until about May of 2023. And each of the projects is going to have an advisory committee that we're working with the towns to set up, and is really meant to be sort of a combination of technical stakeholders and as well as residents and citizens. And then we're going to do a series of community engagement workshops for each of these projects. We're also going to develop some, so again, the idea is to develop strategies to address some of these vulnerabilities that we've identified, turn those strategies into projects, do the cost estimates and develop BCA for those projects, and really try to put forth implementation plans for projects that are cost effective, that can access and be competitive for those federal funds for implementation. So with that, we're going to just sort of run through, and I think we have about 5 minutes for each of these 7. And I'll try to keep it brief. And as Katie mentioned, if you have any questions or discussion points, please enter them into the chat. So we're going to start with the south end of Stratford. And the area in particular from Stratford is the residential area just to the south of I-95 in the coastal floodplain, as well as the commercial industrial area along Lordship Boulevard. So this is an area that includes some public housing. It's a low-income residential area. There's a number of critical facilities, as well as the commercial industrial area has a number of regional hubs for supply chains and economic activity that's important for the region. So Stratford South End is interesting in that the town developed a resilience plan in 2016, and the resilience plan, put forward a number of different strategies and projects for flood protection for this area. And then in the intervening years, the town has been moving forward some of those projects. For instance, they were able to get some FEMA funding to do a protection of the wastewater treatment plant. And then some of the other projects that were in the plan, they've been trying to move forward and hitting some stumbling blocks. So the whole idea of this project in phase 3 is to revisit that plan from 2016 and really assess whether some of those strategies need to be reimagined. Are there alternative strategies that the town can pursue? What are some of the stumbling blocks, whether they're regulatory or whether they're just not feasible or cost effective? So the idea is to really dig into that plan and focus on developing some revised strategies. And the consultant team includes GZA, who was the team that developed that plan originally. And what we're hoping to do here is to really help the town to engage some of the critical stakeholders that are involved in land use issues in the South End, including Sikorsky Airport and DOT, which there's a number of state roads that really control the flow of people in and out of the South End of Stratford. So DOT is a critical stakeholder. And the idea is to develop some concepts that the town can actually move forward with. And so that's basically the idea of the Phase 3 project in Stratford. Okay, moving to Fairhaven. So Fairhaven is a neighborhood in New Haven, Connecticut. This is a peninsula that is bounded by the Quinnipiac and the Mill Rivers, as well as the tidal estuary of Long Island Sound. And so there are a number of these zones of shared risk that we identified in phase 2 in Fairhaven. And the idea for the Fairhaven study and project is to really look at some of the flood mitigation options for some of these zones of shared risk, as well as some of the other issues for the neighborhood. So again, just some of the issues that are relevant for Fairhaven. This is a neighborhood with about 14,000 residents, and there's a number of different transportation and access points in and out of the neighborhood that may be currently susceptible to flooding, or in the future may increasingly be susceptible to flooding. So the idea is to really look at the flood mitigation options for some of those egress and evacuation challenges. There's also some in the lower Mill River district, there's a number of brownfields and old industrial sites. So this study will include an emphasis on addressing, or what the options are to address some of those brownfield flooding issues. So the consultant team includes Fuss and O'Neill. They're going to be leading this study. Um, I forgot to mention too that Fairhaven, when we did the climate change vulnerability index and we looked at heat, Fairhaven was one of the neighborhoods that looked particularly vulnerable to extreme heat in the future. And that's due likely to a lack of tree canopy. There is a number of residents who are socially vulnerable in the neighborhood. There's a lot of impervious surface. So in addition to those flood issues, we want to look at what the mitigation options are for extreme heat for Fairhaven residents as well. Okay, so moving to South Norwalk. So this is an area that includes a major train station, and is an area where the city of Norwalk has been successfully trying to implement a TOD strategy. So really kind of building on the access to transit. And there is a number of different flood issues in this area. There's the Water Street area and Day Street, as well as some of the roads and corridors that connect the neighborhoods to the south. So that includes Meadow Street, it includes Woodward Avenue. So these are some roads that can flood during a coastal flooding event, and may cut off access to residents in evacuating. And so this is an area where, again, we're going to look at some of the flood mitigation options. Also, South Norwalk, again, looks to be an area in our climate change vulnerability index that is particularly vulnerable to extreme heat for a lot of the same reasons. There's a lack of tree canopy, and there's a lot of impervious cover that is indicating that the neighborhood is vulnerable to heat. So we have our colleague from Norwalk, who we've been working with, Michelle, who is also here with us today to just kind of, give a little bit of the city's perspective on this area and what we've been discussing. And I'll pass it over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, John. So I'm Michelle. Hi. So right now with the city, there's a lot of movement on the topic of resilience in Norwalk, which is great. We plan to really step up our resilience planning going into the future, kind of starting with this project and others pending. It wasn't much of a surprise to us in the community that CIRCA had identified South Norwalk as a resilience opportunity area. Over the years, this, like John said, continuously has been flooded and from storm surge and even daily tidal flooding, water street experiences, and this is coupled with continued investment in the area. So it wasn't much of a shock, and it's great that we can kind of start tackling and breaking down solutions for this area. So I think ultimately identifying implementable strategies and hopefully get public buy-in to resiliency planning, some additional activities that are going on with the city. That can help facilitate this effort. We just formed an ad hoc of the Common Council for Sustainability and Resilience. We did a smaller workshop in Sono, and this really highlighted the difficulty of reaching vulnerable populations in this area. And then we've done some various grant writing to kind of state and federal to get a citywide resiliency plan going, but hopefully this can kind of start opening this resiliency efforts within Norwalk and specifically South Norwalk. So this is great.
Thanks for that, Michelle. And then just a couple more details. So the consultant team will be led by AECOM, and they'll be partnering with CIRCA and with the city to, focus on these issues in South Norwalk. All right, so we're going to move to Fairfield, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague David Murphy, who's going to take us from there.
Okay, thanks, John. We're moving quickly, so this is great. We'll have a lot of time for questions and answers. One thing about this project, Resilient Connecticut, that I think needs to be emphasized one more time is it's really very well tailored to finding unmet needs, even in places where we might not think they might pop up. And Fairfield is a really great example. Fairfield is a community where we think about a lot of ongoing resilience work along the shoreline, along Rooster River. But what we're able to find is this kind of lingering concern downtown where stormwater flooding is combining at the train station with 4 underpasses that flood frequently. And so this project is to try to really get at the things that are occurring right in downtown Fairfield. And I'm pleased to have Emmeline Harrigan with me today. She's the Assistant Planning Director in Fairfield. So Emmeline, do you want to say a few words as we move to the next slide with some of the bullet points?
I also wanted to recognize we do have at least one of the members of our local flood erosion control board who are joining us today, watching the presentation. And, I think our work with them as well has really kind of identified some of those frequent problem areas that we have in Fairfield. But, I know that definitely when we kind of looked at the potential things that we could work on in Fairfield, these underpasses kept coming up again and again and again. Some of them are located within the FEMA regulated floodplain and some of them just are not. But one of the things that we felt very strongly about is that we had heard through our colleagues in other communities that this is also a problem for them. And, it really does cut off our north-south passageways and access ways. And so, it's definitely something that with Metro North, communities throughout Connecticut will have to address at some point with rising sea level, rising groundwater issues. And just to give you an idea as to how low lying some of these underpasses are, they tend to be at elevation 6, elevation 8. So they're just, the low places where the water goes. So David, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks. No, these pictures are great. 3 of these are underpasses in Fairfield, and they have a combination of issues. Stormwater collects in them because they dip down, of course, but sometimes there's capacity limitations in the catch basins. Sometimes the pipe leading away from the catch basin has a very, very low slope, so the flow isn't conveyed. And in some cases, the pipe then ends at tidal waters, so it can be submerged outlet conditions. We have a picture here from South Road in Groton, which is kind of the go-to in Connecticut that we all use for a photo of a flooded underpass, and somebody, of course, trying to drive through it. So, very similar typologies across the state. And so we're hoping to really try to get at this in Fairfield. Next slide. So some of the final thoughts about this one of the 7 projects. We've got some of the roads listed that we're going to be looking at, South Benson Road, Post Road, etc. And these are all roads that lead away from coastal areas through downtown and to downtown, but then to the northern part of the town. So they're kind of wanting to be resilient corridors, and this project can help us address how to do that. And not to minimize the other aspect, which is the downtown green infrastructure. The town has done a lot of work in installing green infrastructure near the railroad, and this project will help advance that as well. Okay, next slide. So Brantford is very similar in some ways to Fairfield in that it deals with an underpass. It's one underpass, however, and it's not a road that's as well traveled as those in Fairfield. And in this case, this underpass is leading to direct flooding of the Meadow Street, Hammerfield area. And the flooding is problematic for a few reasons, which we'll look at on the next slide, which is the photos. But before we get there, so this project aims to find if there can be a closure structure that's appropriately sized and designed to be deployed in front of that underpass to reduce flooding in downtown Brantford, and really also to use the railroad grade as part of the flood protection system, and how that can be done appropriately. Really quick, I meant to say in Fairfield, I didn't mention the consultant that we brought on board. It's AECOM. In this case, Brantford, it's Fuss & O'Neill. Next slide. Here are some of the photos of the downtown Brantford area that we're hoping to address. So the underpass is locally known as a cattle crossing. It's very small. It's one way leading from one street near the brewery into downtown. There's a former substation in the area of flood risk. There's a pumping station, which you can see in the lower left picture. And then there's actually a critical facility in Brantford that's in the area of flood risk, which is the community center. And because it's in that area, you can't see it so well in the pictures, but there are slots in front of the doors and windows for flood barriers to be installed. So there really is a risk of flooding in this area, and it's a location where there's a lot of critical facilities. Next slide. So to summarize, the project will be to look at that flooding source, the Brantford River, see if there's a way to block some of the floodwaters coming into the downtown area through the cattle crossing, through some sort of closure structure. How would that be designed to be next to the railroad? Could the railroad grade be used for flood protection? Is a FEMA map revision even feasible? Can the rail grade be overtopped in a 100-year storm? So these are all the things that we'll be looking at. And again, it's a common typology. Okay, next project. So Ansonia, we're really pleased that Ansonia is the recipient of one of these projects. Downtown Ansonia has seen a lot of development in recent years, non-residential uses like new restaurants, but also a lot of apartment complexes being advanced, a lot of apartment units being built downtown. It is a TOD area. It's got regional infrastructure. It's along a Metro North rail line. And I think what the city is really interested in next is developing the Ansonia Brass and Mill brownfield area, and also enhancing some TOD connectivity across the Naugatuck River. What's really interesting in Ansonia, as many of you know, there's existing flood protection systems in place. We can go to the next slide. And so it's not a simple matter to just do a project in a place that is protected by existing flood protection systems, otherwise known as levees, but some of these are concrete walls. So the left-hand side on the top is an image of downtown Ansonia. On the right, you can see that's downtown behind the concrete wall, looking across the river. Lower left is a view of a different part of the flood protection system where there's riprap in place. You can also see Ansonia Brass and Copper in the background. And then the lower right is an existing opening in that system, which used to be an old bridge that can be that crossed the river to access Ansonia Brass and Copper. So the next slide, please. So this project is really trying to attempt to solve a few challenges. Can downtown connectivity be enhanced to make that TOD sort of more vibrant at the same time that Ansonia Brass and Copper is developed? Can a new bridge be built over the Naugatuck River? A connector road has long been desired from Route 8 to downtown Ansonia. How can that get through the flood protection system? Is that even possible? Is it feasible? And then lastly, really important, but the heat mitigation aspect. There's not a lot of places to cool off. There's not a lot of shade in downtown Ansonia, and there is a sort of a lack of a cooling center that's within walkable distance of the downtown. AECOM is our consultant on this project. Next slide. Okay, this is the last of the 7, I believe. So this is Danbury, and this is an image of downtown Danbury. You can see the blue dashed line is the TOD drive shed, and then this area is just south of the Still River along Main Street, which is also a state road. Next slide. So in downtown Danbury, there's been a stream that we lovingly refer to as East Ditch. It's been in place in a culvert for more than 100 years. It was placed in a culvert in order to develop downtown Danbury, and it leads the stream being in the culvert combined with impaired and undersized drainage systems leads to flooding on Main Street and the neighborhood to the east of Main Street. We've engaged Fuss and O'Neill for this project. They've done a lot of work in Danbury over the years. Next slide. So this project is aimed at reducing the flooding along Main Street and along East Ditch, which are, again, part and parcel, very related. Some of the pictures here on the upper left, this is kind of a picture of East Ditch as it is. It's an area that is in culverts mostly, but there are little bits and pieces where you can kind of look down and see water, a typical urban stream. On the right-hand side is a view of some of those downtown houses at risk. The lower left is a segment of Main Street that floods because of the drainage system being old and connected to East Ditch. And then the right-hand side is kind of the downstream end of East Ditch. It outlets to the Still River near a skating rink, which happens to be a place where the city can use as a cooling center. They don't have a formal cooling center downtown. It's been used temporarily in the past. So this project would get at the flood risk reduction, the drainage improvements, and identifying a place for cooling, and also opportunities to green the downtown so that heat is less of an issue. Next slide. So this slide just lists some of the goals. Again, Main Street. I don't think I said it, but when Main Street floods in Danbury, some of the critical facilities cannot be accessed. The city has had people trapped inside of like a public health center, for example, during intense precipitation events. So it's not a situation that's really tolerable, and it needs to be addressed. Okay, I think that's the end of Danbury.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lot of information to go through, so I appreciate it. You doing it, all of you doing it very efficiently. We have a lot of time for questions. And I just want to start by pointing out that while we have Michelle and Emmeline here, and they've participated in kind of giving some additional information about their communities as part of this work, you know, we have been regularly communicating with and collaborating with the municipal staff in all of these areas, in addition to staff from the councils of government who have been integral, I think, in the earlier stages and in phase 2 of this project. And we also meet regularly with state agency staff through the state agency's Fostering Resilience group, and have been, you know, relaying information like this and getting input along the way. We also had public workshops, and I can put links to some of these things that were a part of kind of the public engagement process, leading as one of the steps to these 7 areas and identifying them last spring as well. So I'm going to start out with one question that relates a little bit to the role of the consultants. David and John, can you describe a little bit what, you know, CIRCA obviously has been leading the process quite a bit along with your previous role as a consultant, David, but where do you see the main points of consultant activities, I guess, in the next year's time frame? And so people might be interested a little bit about that.
Yeah, I guess I can start with that. So, you know, each of these projects will be a partnership between the CIRCA staff, which includes, you know, our colleague Yaprak Onat, and the research staff. They'll be taking on some aspects of the modeling of the future conditions for each of these sites. And And then we'll be working with the consultant teams, and the consultant teams are really bringing some of the expertise in design and engineering to help us basically evaluate what some of the options are for developing projects in each of these areas. And these teams were identified and procured through originally there was a request for qualifications that we did during phase two. And then we had an RFP process, and these consultants were selected after review of proposals that they submitted. And they've all had extensive experience working on these types of projects, both in Connecticut and across the region. So we're pretty excited to have some additional assistance and expertise to kind of join us in this process. But their role is primarily to bring that expertise in the design and engineering aspects and do some of the cost benefit. And so they'll be taking on some of that work, as well as some of the engagement work during the public workshop phase of each of these. David, I don't know if you have anything else you want to throw in there.
No, you covered it, John. I think, that to the extent that these projects will end with grant applications to state and federal agencies such as FEMA BRIC, we're going to need the consultants to really hammer home the cost estimates and the benefit cost analysis and concepts or sketches that go along with that. It's the kind of thing that I think will really benefit these projects. And then there are specific tasks such as in Danbury, a constructability review of the existing design from 20 years ago that clearly fit, really well with what consultants can do. So, yeah, hoping to get at a lot of things that haven't been able to be addressed in these areas.
And David, you mentioned FEMA BRIC as one of the potential sources of federal funding that we, can hope that these projects can leverage, I guess, in the future. I'm not sure if Emmeline or Michelle, if you have spoken at the town level about, ways that you might use this kind of work in addition to, some of these kind of grant applications. Are there other ways that you could see using the products that would come from this kind of work?
Michelle, do you want to start or?
Sure. I think what we've heard that we need under our belt, like these plans and studies to be able to get federal funding and state funding. And I think that's kind of for the city where we lack. And I think in addition to that, hopefully, we can have more resilient infrastructure that we don't already have. And I think that's just like the ultimate goal, especially in South Norwalk, where all these overlapping contributing factors. So, yeah.
I can only speak for generally. I will disclose that I'm based in plan and zoning, and a lot of these grant applications, especially for infrastructure projects, are normally put together by my colleagues in the engineering department. So I know that one of the projects that was referenced here was Stratford's wastewater treatment facility protection plan, and Fairfield also did a similar project, which is now complete. But we didn't actually apply for BRIC funding for that. So, I think one of the things to be, very cognizant of as you're looking forward for these projects is, the benefit cost analysis. I know that for us in Fairfield, not related to the Resilient Connecticut projects that are identified, but we have had issues with some of our BCAs not showing an over one as required in order to be eligible for some of the funding. So, that's also something to be very aware of. Because, if it's going to come from FEMA, you're always going to have that BCA requirement. So, that's going to be that's going to be a concern. I don't know whether some of the some of the requirements for how they come together for the BCA. You know, like I don't know whether sometimes in our engineering department, some of the factors, like we don't plump enough of them up in order to get a higher BCA. That might be also something to kind of be cognizant of moving forward. You know, I know that in Fairfield, we've had a few issues with our BCAs not coming out high enough.
Yeah, it's helpful just to have your, I think, local perspective on how this work. Even Emmeline, like you mentioned, working with different departments within your own community, you know, where you have like a common set of information that you can be using to have that, you know, hopefully maybe greater collaboration on topics related to resilience and infrastructure, and you know how to move some of these things forward in a more coordinated way, even between, you know, departments within one community, but also between other towns too. So as we all know, these issues don't stop at town borders. David, I thought I would ask a question for you, and I'm guessing we'll just end this webinar a little early, but if people are on and participating today who are not from New Haven and Fairfield counties, they might be interested to know that this kind of work is going to be continuing in the rest of the state. So you've been very busy and have been putting lots of miles and WebEx time with other communities outside these two counties. So I thought you could just take a minute to mention that.
Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to have an opportunity to do that, and I wasn't sure the right time, but this seems like it. We are on the hunt. We are meeting with the towns in Rivercog and Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, which are essentially Middlesex and New London County, to try to find these kinds of projects in those communities. And it's been really exciting because without the federal funding aspect, we're doing this with state funds going forward. Without the HUD funding link, which is what fueled the projects we just looked at today, we can really cast a wider net and look for other kinds of challenges and issues that might not be related to transit, might not be related to affordable housing, might not be related to infrastructure. And we're hearing a lot of good input from the towns. We've met with towns that have a lot of public water supply watershed land and are really concerned with roads that wash out and end up in the reservoir. We've met with towns that have a lot of agricultural uses and they're really concerned with extreme heat events and lack of power outages that could occur and what's going to happen to facilities that have thousands of chickens. We're hearing from towns that have a lot of brownfields that need to be redeveloped. So we're hearing a lot of really unique climate-driven concerns and looking for the next 7 of these or more to tackle a year from now. So stay tuned for more on that. I mentioned 2 of the COGs, River COG and Southeastern COG. We're also going to be meeting with Capital Region COG, which is 38 towns, sometime this fall. So a lot of good work coming.
So David, you mentioned a lot of issues that are related to inland, but we have a question coming from Deb Abibu, who is one of Sea Grant's 2 resilient specialists in their extension, with their extension focus on resilience. She asked, do any of these projects aim to use natural infrastructure solutions? So I'm guessing, you know, we all know that in addition to this FEMA BRIC funding, we have NIFWIF funding and National Coastal Resilience Fund and Long Island Sound Futures Fund funding. In fact, you're doing a site visit right after this, David, for one of these projects. But, you know, can you elaborate on whether you've heard any related to green infrastructure or natural kind of living shorelines or infrastructure solutions?
Yeah, I think John and I both have a few things to say, but I'll just answer by drawing attention away from the shoreline a little bit. So in a project like Danbury, we are looking for green infrastructure options that will reduce runoff, which is leading to the flooding, and also create green space for some cooling effects. So absolutely, we're aiming to use natural infrastructure solutions where we can. John?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, you know, as I mentioned, a lot of the areas that showed up as vulnerable to heat in the CCBI have a lack of tree canopy. And so, you know, I think increasing the tree canopy is likely to be one of the strategies that emerges from, the heat mitigation planning in each of these communities. So I think we're absolutely, wherever we can incorporate green infrastructure, natural infrastructure, we're looking to do that.
Another question, can you explain the method used to measure flooding conditions? Examples that they gave are sensor type and network. I wish that our assistant director of research, Yaprak Onat, were on, but I don't know if either of you can kind of tackle that. And we can also have her respond directly to that in a little more detail, if that's helpful too.
Yeah, maybe Katie, because I think the question is very technical in terms of exactly which type of sensors we're using. I mean, I can say that in some of these sites, CIRCA is deploying water level meters and other devices that can measure wave energy, but I can't tell you the make and model or the type or the network being used to collect the data. So we probably need to do some follow up on that.
Yeah, and I will say that it's not just flooding conditions that our research team is out measuring. Yaprak's team is also in the field working this summer to install heat sensors. And so I can put in the chat some of that type of information as links. But Jerry, I know you have that question and we can get back to you directly with some more detail about that. All right. I don't see other questions at this point. So I guess, we can end early. I do think it's worth mentioning that in the fall, we're going to have more opportunities to hear about these projects as they get rolling and the consultants get on board. And we also hope to offer site visits and do things a little bit more in person than just these kinds of webinar events. So just keep your eye out. Hopefully all of you on the participant list are receiving the monthly Resilience Roundup newsletter that CIRCA provides that gives those kind of updates about upcoming events and webinars, also news and different announcements about grants, different resources that are available. And it's not just about CIRCA, we try and gather as much information from other sources as we can for those monthly newsletters. So if you're not receiving those, you can go to our CIRCA website, circa.uconn.edu, and at the bottom of that page, sign up for our monthly newsletter. So keep your eye out for things that further explain and provide opportunity to hear more about these projects as well. All right, so thank you so much to our presenters. I really appreciate your time, especially Michelle and Emmeline for joining us. And thank you all for listening in today to hear more about this work. Have a good day.